Trigger warning. This chapter of the fantasy novel Elemental Power has scenes which could be disturbing to some listeners, particularly survivors of ritualistic abuse. This book is not for children. Listener discretion is advised. This is the free audiobook of Elemental Power. If you haven't heard the previous chapters, you'll find the link to the playlist in the description below. You can start at chapter 1 or just pick up where you left off. Book 1, Shattered. Chapter 15, The Heart of the Matter. The sun hadn't yet begun to rise when I rolled out of my cot, ready to face the day. We had a lot of land to cover. I was ready. Peta was awake, dressed, armed, and had breakfast on the table. I smiled at her. I was starving. "Good morning," she said, pouring me a cup of tea. I looked at her cup, and it was filled with the blue flame substance. I accepted the cup she offered and pointed my chin at her drink. "What's that?" "This is strength. It recharges us. I am a fire creature. I consume. If I am outside of my homeland, where the living river fuels me, I must manage to find some strength. This tent is remarkable." Her name's Candlewick. Her brother out there is Cambric. "Yep, she's awesome," I agreed, biting into the sweetest peach I had ever tasted. The juice ran down my chin and dripped from my hands. I felt like I hadn't eaten in years. "Do you think I could drink strength? Is it really fire?" "I don't know," she said, furrowing her delicate brows. Her shiny black eyes met mine and squinted as her cheeks rose up in a smile. "You are welcome to try." A cup of strength appeared before me. It was blue like the inside of a flame, swirling and hot. It didn't seem too hot to drink when I dipped my finger in to test it. I pulled the digit out and sucked the drop from it. "It's good." I drank it all in a few gulps. The strength filled me with heat and power. I felt it ease down my throat and into my stomach, where my bloodstream immediately carried it to every cell in my body. My weariness went away, as did the residual pain from last night's horrors. I felt energized like a toddler with a sugar rush. I drained the cup and slammed it on the table. "Yeehaw!" I said, pulsing with energy. "That's good stuff." It tasted like cranberry juice, tart, without the added sugar. The aftertaste was sweet, though, and it took the edge off the tartness. I picked up my peach again, but waited for the flavor to fade before biting. "I'm glad you like it. We are sisters of flame now," she said, laughing a hilarious staccato that sounded like "hia, hia, hia." It made me break into laughter as well. "Tell me about yourself, Peta. Not what you are, not about being a warrior, I mean, but who you are. What do you want to do when there are no more wars to fight?" Her laughter faded and she sipped her strength and considered her words. "I never allowed myself to dream of having a husband or children. I didn't expect to live long enough to see them grow. But as I've survived so far," she looked down into her cup, shyness coloring her cheeks. The fearless warrior, goddess of fire, was blushing to think of love. "I know a man who'd die to be with you. Literally," I said. "Ah, the water sprite, Marlowe, is it?" "I admit there is a certain attraction there." "Really?" I asked, my voice a bit too high-pitched. She was painfully beautiful, strong and sizzling. Marlowe was, well, a bit watered down. His features were plain, and from what little I knew of him, his attitude was steady, like a calm glacier lake. Perhaps opposites really did attract. She smiled, set down her cup, and served herself some berries. "Yes, I noticed how he looked at me from the start. He seems like a nice fellow. He's very protective of you. Maybe I'm attracted because of the danger of it. You're right. I could kill him just by loving him. If I ever lost control of my passion," she trailed off, the apples of her cheeks the color of well-lit coals. "I think it may be worth a try, but let's get this rescue over with first. The less emotionally distracted you both are, the better. I'm only partially here, even when not thrown into a flashback. I never stop thinking about him. I miss him. You should have seen him before they did that to his face. He was beautiful." Her hand touched mine, and it was warm. "Listen, you just focus on walking and remembering. We will do the rest. For now, you have a few days to find out why you scare the fairies. That is our only hope of getting him back. If you know, we can defeat them." I nodded, finished my breakfast, and made myself ready. I had barely finished lacing my bodice when another flashback hit me. I fell onto the cot, letting it come. My only hope was to get to the heart of the matter. My eyes rolled back in my head. I was at a party in college, freshman year. It was the first party of my higher learning experience, New Year's Day, the millennium. Some friends were there, coaxing me into doing some shots. I did one and nearly threw it back up on them. Shots didn't like me. There was a boy there, a gorgeous boy who seemed to have noticed me. I was looking good tonight. I was in jeans, a tight green sweater, and my long black hair was flowing down my back. Alcohol had lowered some of my inhibitions, and I was feeling fine. He came up and talked to me. I don't know what he said, just listened to his deep voice and watched his lips move. Wow, I'd never felt so free before. He pulled me outside onto the porch. It was finally cold in Texas. What the summers dished out in misery, the winters partially made up for. I noticed something white and square in his upturned palm. It was a sugar cube. "Try this," he said, and put it into my mouth. He ate one too. We made out a little then. He tasted sweet, and thankfully the cold air kept my clothes on. We stayed outside in the crisp new January night, talking and chatting. We had a lot in common. The memory fast-forwarded. He'd gone in for a drink, and I leaned out over the porch rails. A pair of red eyes stared up at me, filled with hate. I backed up against the wall of the porch. There were hooded monks surrounding the house. I screamed and hid my face from them. Looking down at my feet, I saw that all the skin was gone. My feet were dripping blood everywhere. No, my feet couldn't be dripping like that. It was my face. I gave myself a once-over and found that I was covered in blood, sliced and burned and dripping. I ran into the house and hid in a bedroom closet, holding my knees and rocking back and forth. The guy came in and tried to tell me something, but I was panicked. He began to morph into the smoke form of the warlord. I kicked him in the chest, jumped over him, ran out of the house and down the street. Every tree, streetlight, and electric pole turned into a hooded monk. I was completely surrounded. An enormous butterfly appeared before me, flapping its wings and making the monks all disappear. It flew ahead of me, leading the way home. I ended up at the house where I was living with a friend. She wasn't home at the moment, but I managed to get my key in the door and lock out the nightmares. I sat on my bed and hid under the covers until I calmed enough to peek out. My feet weren't bloody anymore. Neither was my body. I was just me again, but every pattern around me swirled and pulsed. I spent several hours just staring at the wallpaper. The night wore on, sleepless and trippy. It occurred to me that I had been drugged. That must have been LSD. I didn't like it. I'd heard stories from friends about how fun it was, but it wasn't good to me. The things I'd experienced seemed so real. I had known exactly what standing on skinned feet felt like. I wondered if my imagination could be that strong. What about that butterfly? I had an irrational fear of butterflies, nudity, and tight places like elevators. Why would I have followed that giant freaking butterfly instead of running away from it? Peta was over me, shaking my shoulder. "It's time to go, Alana. Come, Candlewick has prepared a gurney that we can take with us in case you pass out on the way." "Thanks," I said, the intensity of fear fading into hollow sadness. I missed Glenn desperately. He would have held me close while I dreamed through the terrors of my past. He would have made little jokes and kissed my forehead, his charm disarming the horror. A teardrop climbed out of the rupture in my heart and slid, hot and salty, down my cheek. We joined the others, and Candlewick rolled herself up. Paytok carried her and took Glenn's weapons from me. I didn't protest. My mind was racing. I hadn't remembered what they'd done to me for a few years, from the time I'd escaped to the time I inadvertently took the LSD. That must have triggered me somehow, put me back into the state of mind they'd trained me to reach, to follow the butterfly. I walked behind the others, but Taryn wouldn't let me out of his sight. He stayed a respectful distance away, but could reach me quickly if I fell. I appreciated that and smiled at him. He returned the gesture and we walked a little faster. The day was cold and crisp like the night I'd just experienced. Why couldn't I have seen these wonderful elemental creatures while tripping balls? I much preferred them to the evil, harsh reality of my childhood handlers. My memories had stopped with the bad trip, and I wondered what happened next. Obviously, someone found out who I was. They'd abducted me, or else I wouldn't be here at all. Who had thrown me in the water the night they tried to kill me? Boreas was at the front of our posse, racing ahead on the wind. Peta and Marlowe walked close together. Marlowe was absolutely captivated by the fire sprite. Who wouldn't be? She was a knockout, full of fire and flashback force of character. Perhaps, with some caution, the water and fire could produce a slow burn, one that could last a lifetime. Taryn didn't seem to think much of her beauty. "Are you married, Taryn?" I asked. "Oh, yes, I am," he answered, coming closer to me at the invitation. "I have been bonded for 23 ages. She is my world, and her name is Avani. My love for her was part of what prompted me to come assist you. I must do my part to save her." "Any kids?" "No. We decided not to start a family while the wars were raging. She is a good deal younger than me, so perhaps, when you vanquish the eon of darkness, we can try for some little mud pies." Peta had called me Spark and Flicker. Taryn called his future children mud pies. What if people did the same thing? What would we call kids? Little dust bunnies? Carbon copies? We lapsed into silence, and he moved away to give me space once more. I was comfortable in my own head, but I felt bad about walking in silence while my companions chatted and laughed. Boreas was now on Peta's other side. They were having a good time leading the pack, but their pace was a bit too quick for me. Only thoughts of Glenn kept me somewhat sane and moving forward. I closed my eyes and pictured his face, his smile. I could easily curl up in that image and float away with it. He was my happy place. He was my over the rainbow. Everything went dark. I was at a bar, a tavern-style joint. Sitting alone, I was watching all the people around me. I saw girls getting hit on, and some liked it. Guys were dancing around, having a great time in their own little worlds. I had a bottle of Shiner in front of me. I loved Shiner Bock. I had just turned 21, and this was a new experience for me. I peeled the yellow label as I watched the swirls of bodies and emotions, folding it until it was too small to fold more. A man detached himself from a jukebox and spun around, ready to dance to whatever he'd chosen. It was some ridiculous country song, the kind where man loves woman, woman leaves, dog leaves, boots leave, his gun breaks, but at least he has his beer. He grabbed a random girl and began two-stepping with her, completely out of sync with the beat. His movements were way too fast, as if he was dancing to a different song. She looked dazed, letting him spin her around like a cheap carnival ride. I stood up and pulled some quarters from my jacket pocket. I put them in the jukebox and selected Cheap Sunglasses by ZZ Top and Fat Bottomed Girls by Queen. I went back to my table and waited for the twangy kicker song to end. When Cheap Sunglasses came on, a few people cheered. That prompted me to finish my beer as I boogied secretly in my chair, watching the others dance. The atmosphere had changed. This was much better. "Can I buy you another?" said a man's voice from behind me. I turned and my jaw dropped open as I saw my professor, Chris, offering to buy me a beer. I had taken his philosophy class as a freshman. Now as a senior I had to take world religion, another of his classes. He was dressed with impeccable style. His jeans were a dark wash and a very flattering cut. They accentuated the heartbreaking curve of his glutes. He wore a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, a brown vest, blue tie, and his Ravenesque hair was immaculate. "Sure, have a seat," I said, surprised that my voice wasn't squeaky. I felt all the blood rush to my cheeks, and once again cursed my traitorous face. He smiled, motioned for a server, and sat next to me. He was drinking a Shiner as well. Great minds really must think alike. Man, he was a hottie. "Great choice, by the way," he said, flicking his head in the direction of the jukebox. "Are you a classic rock fan?" "Oh yeah," I said and nodded. "Modern music is crap." "I couldn't agree more," he said, dimpling at me. Sweet God in heaven, he had dimples. My heart skipped a beat. I loved his dark hair color and eyes. In truth, he was a bit too GQ for my taste, but he was growing on me. I drank the last swig of Bock and tried to get my face under control. "Do you have a boyfriend?" he asked. I nearly died. "No," I said, smiling sheepishly. "That's shocking," he exclaimed, shaking his head. "You're beautiful." "Oh, thanks." I felt small, but happy. "I mean that," he said, putting his hand on mine. "Smart, too. You're making a perfect grade in my class." Great. He had to bring up that he was my teacher. It could never be. I pulled my hand free and accepted the beer the server handed me. "I've never had feelings for a student before." "Yeah?" I looked up to meet his eyes to make sure he was talking about me. I couldn't read him at all. It was like there was nothing but stone behind those dark eyes. "Yeah," he said and took my hand again. "You don't have feelings for me?" he asked, a knowing grin on his full lips. Maybe I can work with." He dimpled again. "Isn't it against the rules for you to date a student?" "It is," he said, knocking back his beer and slamming the empty bottle down. "You don't think the taboo makes it more fun?" He was gliding his index finger up my wrist and onto my arm. Goosebumps broke out. I rubbed my hand over them, suddenly cold. "Sure, being bad can be fun," I agreed. "But I don't even know your last name, Professor. I don't know anything about you. I'm just another student from your class." I paused to take a swig and note the gleeful reaction of the dancers as fat-bottomed girls came on. Of course, leave it to a philosophy teacher to think rules or guidelines for the masses not applicable to you. He laughed, and I smiled, unsure. He had humor, that was certain. He was brilliant, strong, attractive, suave. Something was off about him, though. It was like that feeling I got after watching a scary movie. I know there's nothing there, nothing under my bed, but I can't make myself put my feet out of the covers, no matter how badly I have to pee. It was like that, with him. His laugh was infectious. It drew me in. I wanted to be his girlfriend more than anything else in the world, spooky feelings and all. He would be my very first real boyfriend. The last guy who'd paid attention to me I kicked in the chest and never saw again, and that was years ago. This was my chance to finally feel something, to be wanted, to be touched. The temptation was overwhelming. "My last name is Lords," he said, and I felt tiny cold feet skitter up my spine. Why did his name creep me out? "And I want you, Alana. You aren't just another student. I want you to be mine." He leaned in closely, so close that I could see the darkness of the freshly shaved whiskers just under his tanned skin. "Do you want me?" he asked, in a whisper that made my fight-or-flight response kick into overdrive. "I'm not sure," I said. "I'm not sure it's such a great idea. I wouldn't want to get in trouble. My education is all I've got." "I promise you, Alana, you will not get in trouble. We won't get caught. There's just something about you that excites me. It's not that you're my student. Don't look at me like that. It's something in your eyes. Something powerful and dangerous lies there. I want to see what it is that makes you so beautifully deadly." I was a sucker for a gorgeous man and some flattering words, but this was pushing it. He'd gone too far. It felt disingenuous now. He must have noticed that the spell was broken, because he sat back and crossed his arms over his chest. My, you are a wonder," he said, mostly to himself. "I'm sorry, Professor. I've got to be going. I've got a test tomorrow," I said, rising. I did, in his class. I finished the last few drops of my beer and threw down $10. "Call me Chris," he said. "And don't worry, I'm sure you'll do fine," he called as I walked out the door and into the busy streets. When I woke, I was lying strapped on the cot, being carried by Taryn. There was a rope tied around his massive waist, attached to the makeshift gurney. I bumped and rattled over the terrain as he pulled me behind him. Boreas was looking at me, slight worry in his face. "Glenn sends a message," he said. I nodded. Gable moved over next to Boreas, wanting to hear it too. "He says they grow anxious. They know you are beginning to remember. He tells you that he loves you," he said to me, then turned to Gable. "And to you, he says, take care of her." All the color drained from Gable's face. I shook my head and boggled, open-mouthed, as I felt the wetness creep from my eyes. The thought of losing him made me lean over the side of the gurney and vomit. There went all my strength. The splat was tinged with blue. Gable and Boreas stepped carefully around the bilious puddle with somber faces. I focused all of my attention on Rock. I had to summon him. We would never make it in time on foot. I thought intensely of his salamander smile and let my tears fall to the ground. Gable realized what I was doing, squeezing his eyes shut and letting a tear of his own fall. Marlowe sensed the power of water being called and ran back to ask Gable what we were doing. They conferenced for a moment, but I could spare no thoughts. I had to reach Rock. He had to send Blaze to us. Finally, the projection of Rock appeared in a cloud of vapor in front of me, and since I was facing backward, everyone stopped walking and turned. If I didn't know better, I would think him rather harmless, his giant salamander face so calm and stoic. Peta knelt on one knee with her hand in a fist over her heart. Marlowe shrank back. Taryn stared, and Boreas looked startled. Gable seemed unfazed, his face still pale. "You called me, Alana?" his deep, liquid magma voice asked. "Yes, they're gonna kill Glenn. We can't make it on foot in time to save him. Please send Blaze to help us. We have to get there as quickly as possible. They know I'm remembering," I pleaded. Rock nodded and disappeared. With a wave of relief, I instantly fell back into a memory. I was sitting with Chris on his couch watching the big screen TV in his home, which was decorated so minimally it was almost sterile. Everything was black and white. There were no pure comforts. Each item had a purpose to serve. There were no bowls of fruit or pine cones or anything homey. The surfaces were polished, all geometry and straight lines. He was definitely too GQ for my taste. I tended toward whimsy, not stark architecture. There was a giant bowl of popcorn in his lap. We were sharing it, drinking beer and watching Ally McBeal. We at least had this one thing in common. Very little else was shared between us. I was extremely guarded around him, unable to shake the monster under my bed feeling. I was a college graduate now, but the wrongness of him hadn't gone away. The show ended, and he recommended we watch a movie. I agreed and went to the restroom while he got the DVD going. I walked back into the living room and heard the opening credits to The Wizard of Oz. Chris was watching me intently, like a spider watches a fly as it struggles in its web. A large butterfly fluttered above me, but I ignored it, glaring at him. I felt myself trying to leave my body, but I couldn't let that happen, not with that look on his face. What the hell was happening? When I opened my eyes, I was looking at a giant dragon eyeball. It blinked and backed up a bit, revealing a toothy grin. "Well met, Alana." "Hello, Blaze. Thanks for coming," I answered weakly. "It is my pleasure. Earth Sprite, put her on my back, please." Taryn picked me up as if I were a dry leaf and placed me onto the scaly back of the dragon. I noticed that he did not come alone. There were 2 other dragons. 2 of us per dragon climbed up and were off, soaring through the skies. I felt immense relief wash over me with the wind that glided through. We were traveling much faster now, high above the ground. Taryn had a tight grip on my gurney and his face was tight with worry. It occurred to me that he was literally out of his element. I wanted to stay here, to see the landscape slip behind us as the dragons commanded the currents of the wind, but the memories wouldn't relent. A bright flash of light stung my eyes and I found myself lying strapped to a metal table. There were hooded monks all around me and I was naked, but now I was a grown woman. There was an oxygen mask over my face and vitals monitors beeping beside me. One of the monks was holding what looked like a turkey baster in his hand. I began to struggle, fighting for my life, but my feet were spread wide and strapped into metal stirrups. I'd read enough sci-fi to know what they were doing to me. The monk used the baster to carefully inseminate me. Me! I was 30 years old and I'd never even gotten close to being intimate with a man. Now, thanks to these jerks, I was skipping the fun part. My struggles were working, my hands were nearly free. The monks were so intent on getting the job done that they didn't notice. I sat up sharply and punched the nearest monk in the face. It didn't feel right, too squishy. The head whipped back and the hood fell down. It was not a man. It was a gray creature with an upside-down teardrop head and huge bug-like black eyes. He had a tiny mouth and dots for nostrils. I didn't know why I hadn't noticed the color or shape of their hands before. They were far too long to be human. gray and only had 3 fingers. I didn't waste time in goggling at the creatures. I lashed out at the others and they shrank away, allowing me time to unfetter my legs. Kicking and punching, I knocked each one of them down. I shoved the turkey baster through the mouth hole of the one who had violated me, seeing it come out the back of its skull. How could that be? The baster was only cheap plastic. An alarm sounded, and I ripped a hooded robe off of one of the creatures and put it on. Left naked, the being was thin and short, with super long arms. Its head was enormous compared to its body. It also had no genitals, and its skin was a sickly gray color. I couldn't resist. I picked up a scalpel on a tray beside me and cut into its face, watching a beam of dark light stream from it. That should not have happened. There was no blood, no sign of pain, even. It was only a suit, a vehicle, as I had been. I dropped the scalpel, turned, and ran as fast as I could. I made it to the exit and burst out into the bright sunlight. I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I'd done was being observed. I felt sick to my stomach. What had they done to me? Was I going to get pregnant? How had they found me? I had been so careful. After that day at Chris's when he played the Wizard of Oz, I knew he was somehow involved. Once he played my trigger, I had to run. I'd left town that night, changed my name, and started life over 1,000 miles away. It wasn't the first time I'd started from scratch. How had they found me? Taryn was clinging to me. I could see the bushy beard that obscured his face. He was humming to himself nervously. I felt sorry for him being so far from the earth on the back of a dragon. I had very little time to think of him, though. I felt the wave of memory hit me again. I was in my room dancing to music. It was one of those rare moods, and I was enjoying it, cleaning and wiggling my booty to the beat. The house was empty. My roommate was staying with her boyfriend more and more. I loved having the house to myself. I was picking up bits of laundry and tossing them into the basket with a flourish when a sharp pain struck my uterus. I doubled over, clutching myself. It felt like the cramps I'd had with the stomach flu a few months before. I straightened up, the pain gone, and went about my business. A few minutes later, I felt another sharp pain. This time, a large gush of blood dribbled down my legs. I had no idea what was happening. I'd never cramped like this when I'd had my period, but I hadn't had one in 2 months now. I had scheduled a doctor's appointment next week to find out why. The pain struck again, and I fell to the ground, my face in the thick pile carpeting, writhing in agony. Now, I was afraid to be alone. I tried to crawl over to my cell phone, but couldn't. The waves of pain were coming faster now. Instead, I crawled to the toilet, feeling that I was going to soil myself momentarily. When I made it to the seat, I felt something small slide from my body, but not from the exit I'd expected. I stood and looked between my legs into the bowl, seeing only darkness. I flicked on the light, looking into the bowl to see what I had passed. It was small, very small. I knew what it was immediately. No period for 2 months. Last week I'd thrown up when I'd smelled my deodorant. That blob was a baby. But that was impossible. I strained my brain trying to remember any time I had given in to temptation, been blackout drunk, any time I had even come close to disrobing in front of a man. Since Chris, I hadn't so much as looked at a man, and I hadn't seen him in 9 years. Then a flash, and I remembered the grays and the turkey baster. Sitting abruptly back on the toilet, I threw up into my own lap, gasping for breath and heaving, blood and vomit shooting out of both ends. I put my head between my knees in an effort to keep from passing out. I woke up a short while later, covered in my own waste. I dragged myself into the shower and washed it all away, sobbing ridiculously over the impossible life I had just flushed. The warm water poured over my face. I pushed at the glass of the shower wall, trying to keep the fear in check. What in the name of God was happening to me? I knew this was no miracle, no immaculate conception. This was manipulation by some creatures that had kidnapped me and pumped me full of sperm. I flipped between sorrow and rage until the water turned cold and I finally stepped out. Exhaustion wrapped around me like a blanket. I couldn't even clean up the mess in front of the toilet. I stumbled to my bed and fell into it face down, wrapped in my towel and still bleeding. Taryn had me in his arms, cooing to me. Apparently, this memory had been violent. Blaze was looking over his shoulder. I waved away his concern, and he turned his gaze forward. I smiled faintly at Taryn and the concern radiating from him. What the devil was going on? I felt like I was on the brink of realization, that in just a few more memories I would have the answer, would know the thing that made the fairies want to kill my husband to stop me. My mind was a whirlpool, though. I couldn't grasp one cohesive thought through the turbulence. I closed my eyes and forced myself to breathe deeply, slowly. My heart was racing, and I noticed with surprise that my legs were clenched shut. Taryn loosened his grip on me, realizing that I was back to myself. "You nearly fell," he said. "I barely caught you in time. You were thrashing like a worm in the sunlight." "Sorry." I was still watching the thoughts swirling in my mind. He didn't speak further, but I noticed he wouldn't take his hands off me completely. If I fell, all was lost. I tried to will the swirl of thoughts to lessen their speed. It took a while, but they finally obeyed me. They were nearly slow enough for me to see now. Words floated out of the maelstrom, disjointed, but something. Warlord. Heir. Chris. Wizard of Oz. Butterflies. Monks. LSD. Baby. Prophecy. I was back in the memory I'd had at Rock's Palace. Hopefully, that meant I nearly understood now. This was after I'd lost the impossible pregnancy, because I'd been repainting my room to forget. New carpet was being installed the next day to erase the bloody reminder of my violation. The memory picked up where it left off. The monks carried me down into the basement of the mansion, which turned out to be the school I'd been forced to go to as a kid. They led me to the black and white sacrificial room. I saw the cat of nine tails displayed on the altar amidst the many stone knives. The hooded monks began to chant. I was the sacrifice this time. I knew that. I had rejected the child of the warlord, Chris's baby, I supposed. My body cast it out, just as I had cast out Crigil Lort at age 16. There wasn't room enough in my body for two souls, whether it be through possession or conception. They tied me to the post and began to whip me, but I refused to follow the butterfly that flitted above me. I'd be damned if I'd hide in a world of make-believe, while my body died, lost forever in a void with nowhere to return to. I endured every strike, every cut, every curse hurled my way. When they had finished whipping me, Chris, in his white robe, stepped forward with a serrated stone knife and bowl, slit my throat shallowly, and drained my blood. His eyes drilled into mine as he took a sip. Now I knew there really had been a monster under my bed. They, the cult, passed the bowl of my blood amongst themselves while what was left continued to pour from my neck and flowed over my breasts like a crimson waterfall. A few of the cult members did not drink the blood. They pretended to, but didn't drink. I stared at them in confusion. They passed the bowl on, and the final participant shattered it on the floor. Then they all advanced on me, chanting and slashing, kicking and beating me. I was so lightheaded, I just wanted to die. I looked up and saw Crigil Lort in his demonic form, laughing. No fight was left in me. My life had been a string of tortures and manipulations. It seemed a joy to end it. I was seized by my arms and legs. Someone whispered in my ear, "We have waited for this day for centuries. Defeat him. Only you can defeat him." They carried me across the floor. I was plunged underwater, down and down, but then a blue swirling light and hands pushed on my back as I was shoved up and over the edge of the dead spring. My last breath faded in my old world as I drew my first one here. When I came to, the swirling words had formed a conclusion, one that I spoke aloud, my eyes still closed. They couldn't enslave me. They taught me how to defeat them before they knew I wouldn't bend to them. After I escaped, they tried to produce a perfect vessel to receive the power your world would cast out when destroyed. But I rejected it. I know how to defeat them. I know what they are, how they infiltrate my world. I command the elements. I can defeat them because they taught me how. I opened my eyes and saw the whole company was gathered around me. We had landed, and the dragons were gone. We had arrived in the Central Lands. Everyone looked afraid of me. "Let me see if I remember," I whispered. "Lend me a bit of your elements," I said louder. "Place them in their designated points." Peta responded first. picking up a dry twig and breathing on it, bursting it into flame. She stabbed it into the earth in the south. Next, Marlowe made a hole and filled the depression with water in the west. Taryn took some sand and sprinkled it into a pile in the north. Boreas set a small whirlwind in motion, confining it to the east. I took one of Petah's many knives from her belt and sliced open my hand in the center of it all. There was a collective gasp from everyone watching. I smiled grimly. By the power of the elements, I declare myself the enemy of the warlord. By my own blood I do swear. The blood of fallen angels flows in my veins, and I declare with all power of magic held within that I will complete my task. I will defeat the enemy. I harness the power of the Creator over these elements, and in my very blood, as a curse against the warlord and his wicked ones, they will fall, and those who took my love will die. My voice was so harsh and menacing, it sounded foreign to my own ears. I dripped the blood of my hand over each element, clockwise, and returned to the center, the heart of magic. I was in the land of blood, and from me it spilled. I held up my dripping hand in the direction of the castle, which was just visible up ahead in the fading light. A wall of earth shot up from the ground like a wave, frozen at its peak. I swirled my hand in a circle over my head, and we were encased in a dome of fire. Bringing both hands together, a wall of water extinguished the fire that left us dry. As I flung both arms into the air, a wall of wind exploded against the wave of earth, and it crumbled like 1,000,000 years of erosion in a second. Swirling my hand in front of my face, I called on the power of fire to see Glenn. I saw him then, chained painfully to a stone wall, in a dank inner dungeon. I could only see a tiny bit of him. His cell was too dark. The fire was in the hall. I waved that away and clapped my hands together, prayer-like, calling on the power of water to show him to me. I appeared beneath him in a puddle of blood, tears, and other vile fluids. I could see up into his battered face, and the rage in my heart caused flames to leap out of the puddle and settle along the walls. I could now see him clearly. He looked around, confused and blinded by the sudden brightness. He was also obviously afraid of whatever usually came with the lights. I willed my shape to be seen, and his eyes snapped onto me, the most exquisite relief pushing through the unbearable wreckage of his features. "Alana?" he asked, as if he was dreaming. I bent forward and kissed the tip of his broken nose, the only part of his face not covered with filth. "Yes, my love. I'm coming to get you, tonight. Don't lose hope. I know who I am now. It's too late for them. I will find you, Glenn. Stay with me." He couldn't smile without opening dozens of wounds, but he swallowed hard and nodded. I could see faith return to his eyes. It was faith he had abandoned in the darkness and pain. Curse those fairies. They would pay for this. "I have to go, darling. Be looking for me. I have a lot of help. We'll save you." I kissed the top of his head, which was matted with dirt and dried blood. I couldn't really feel him on my lips. I was a projection of myself, and it was all I could do. I waved goodbye and came back to my body in the wastelands, surrounded by 4 frightened elementals and an equally terrified elf. They were kneeling, facing me, their heads bowed. I didn't like that one bit. "Get up," I said, shooing them away by flapping my hands. "It's only me. We're going in tonight. We need a plan." I stood and stalked around, pacing. We hadn't set up camp, but I needed sustenance. I pulled Candlewick from Petah's shoulder, and she popped up for me immediately. I entered the tent and beckoned everyone else inside with me, holding the door for them as they filed in like zombies, staring. I swirled my hand and encased us and the tent in the dome of fire, ensuring we remained undisturbed while planning our attack. I wished for some pearl wine, a cup of strength, and some of those seed crackers. I needed food, but didn't want flavor, only fullness. The others wished for their own food, and we ate and drank in silence at first. I was nearly done with my first cup of strength when Gable leaned over toward me. "I hope there are no hard feelings from before at Ambius's. I'm sorry I came after you like that. I was captivated by your spirit," he said. "Or stinking drunk. And stinking drunk. And jealous. And grieving for Lillian. It's been 10 ages, but not a day goes by when the memory of her doesn't haunt me. I have forsaken wine on this journey, as you must have noticed." "I did," I answered, setting down my cracker and looking at him squarely. "I am willing to do whatever it takes to see my brother back to you safely," he said. "I have sworn an oath that I would never pursue another man's wife again. That sin leaves a curse, impressions that torture you when it's over. I apologize for my behavior, and I hope you realize that I will do anything to get Glenn back. Please, forgive me." He spoke with so much passion it made my throat seize up. His face was changed. He had the look of a man holding back a lot of pain. "Okay, I forgive you." "Now, how should we attack?" Peta asked, impatient and hungry for blood. "We have the princess now," Taryn said. "I never thought you would become her. Forgive my unbelief." He bowed his large, good-natured face. I didn't like the sudden reverence. I pounded my fists on the table and everyone jumped. Standing to my feet, I loomed over them, scowling. The effort was marred by the curtains of dark hair that fell on each side of my face. I huffed and flipped it back out of the way. "I've had just about enough of this. Stop treating me like royalty. I'm just me, just Alana, and I only want to get Glenn back. I don't want you to kneel or bow or beg forgiveness or anything that takes 1 second of our focus away from saving my husband." My voice had risen to a crescendo without intending it. Everyone nodded, and I took my seat again. Peta was smiling at me, positively beaming. "I like you," she said, and raised her cup. I let a half-choked laugh escape. "I think we should just start marching and knock down the front door," Marlowe said. "They won't be expecting a direct approach. Unless they heard your conversation with Glenn, they won't know that you are now the feared princess. They will be guarding Glenn in the hallways leading to him. I say we use our fellow sprites to guide us to the thickest concentration of the fairies." "Yes," exclaimed Boreas. "You're right. Let's call in our spies for a report. Then we move." "Huzzah!" boomed Taryn, and the others joined in the cheer. I sighed and went to lie down. The memories and magic had taken so much from me that strength and pearl wine couldn't restore it. I noticed the first of the spies coming in to report. The 4 embodied sprites took different corners of the tent, so the elementals in pure form wouldn't harm one another. The informants did not bother putting on a bodily form, retaining anonymity, except for the earthworms, who spoke with Taryn with their tiny heads peeking up from the ground. Gable stayed by the door and directed them to their places. It felt nice to have a team of people on my side. I drifted off into a dreamless sleep, clenching my bloodied hand, knowing the stinging pain was proof of my power. The power I would use to rescue my love. If you enjoyed this chapter, please give it a like and/or a comment. And if you think someone else might enjoy the story, please share with them the first chapter. If you subscribe and turn the notification bell on, you'll be the first to know when the new chapter is released.